So joining us today is Chris Wasko. I think Chris, you're in San Diego, California. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, I am currently.
And you are a psychic medium and a consultant. You do all sorts of stuff, don't you?
I do, yes.
So I appreciate you coming on here because as we talked off the air, people who are around my age, especially, the 80s and 90s, we hear psychic medium and we think this lady Cleo from the Caribbean that charges $4.99 a minute. Chris, what is a psychic medium?
Well, I think it does vary, so I can understand why people would kind of have this person or image in mind of who that type of person is. So, someone who is psychic has the ability to read energy, to read people. Some may have an aspect of being able to foresee the future. So, there are different elements. My psychic abilities are often connected to people, to read their energy, to understand who they are before they even enter the room. You could tell me someone's name and I'm going to get a read on them before I even meet them. And then that goes deeper when I do meet them, when we converse. Now, mediumship is you are literally playing a medium role between two sides. So you are working on this plane and the astral plane and connecting with people in spirit or other beings like angels
So
and
kind of
working with
like an
Akashic records.
arbitrator or a referee or a middleman or something?
Uh, Not so much. Middleman is probably the best because you are just helping to bridge the worlds and communicate with loved ones. I will say that that is not the primary element of my work because I just really prefer to work with the living. It's just my personal preference. But people that do mediumship all day long, they are very likely talking to people in spirit all day long.
So what is it that you do? I know what you work with a lot of people who that you describe them as old souls. And I've been described this all my life. People say that I'm an old soul. Chris, what is an old soul? What is it?
So, an old soul can be looked at in a couple of different ways. One way is looking at it just from the aspect of reincarnation, that you have lived many lives, you have had many lives on the earth plane. Now, the other way I explain that is when we look at these lives, we are essentially living all of these lives at the same time. And it's very hard for us as humans to conceptualize that and to wrap our minds around that, which is why I say, well, it's reincarnation, because that's a little more simplified. But ultimately, we are experiencing these lives all at the same time. So when it is looked at in that aspect, it's about experience. So an old soul, when looked at in that aspect, will have more experience and, in many cases, more weight and energy in their soul makeup. And as I read them in their energy reads, they will just feel heavier, that density. It is why a lot of old soul children have such a strong maturity to them.
Okay. So could it be when it comes to children, could this is it similar to like a strong-willed child? Would a strong-willed
Yeah.
child be an old soul?
Yes, it will vary by child and by circumstance, of course. But yes, an old soul child is in a way like a mini grown up. It is very easy to have conversations with them where they are just showing much more mature behaviors. They might even show aspects of past life elements where they're wearing clothes from a different decade and feel very connected to that. Where they speak very differently. Maybe not dramatically, but enough where you can just tell these little subtleties that make them unique. But yes, I do find that they tend to be rather strong willed because they tend to be very secure in themselves and who they are. And as life experiences begin to now evolve and happen, that can and will shift.
So if you're a parent of an old soul or one of these kids that maybe shows this trait, I guess, or this character trait maybe, what advice do you give to parents who are raising these children in with this mentality or this character trait?
So this will really vary because I find it is very common for old soul children to pick rather challenging parents. It is very common for them to have a narcissistic parent, maybe both. if I do believe that's starting to change, but there are elements of that when you really get into the depth of the old soul narcissistic relationship. But when it comes to parenting that type of child, it is really about allowing them to be their authentic selves and not parent them from your own limitations. And that, I think, is incredibly challenging for most parents. But when you have an old soul child, they tend to gravitate towards things and really want to do it. And if you're able to support that, I believe in that. I also believe in letting them be heard, and, respectfully so. If obviously they're being disrespectful, it's a little different, because I know some people like to, may feel a little challenged when I say things like that. Like, as a parent, you're not meant to be your child's friend. I agree, but I also agree in allowing your child to be who they are, and how can you as the parent support that in a way that still keeps that parent child dynamic in that very respectful manner.
Now, you had mentioned narcissism, and I like to think that narcissism is something I know something about, because being a journalist, I've dealt with a lot of politicians, and I've always said you can't be a politician without being a narcissist.
Very
It's a
difficult. Yeah.
character trait, right?
Yeah.
It has to be this way. But I wanted to ask you about this, because as I was going through some of your show notes and prepping for this, we always hear the term narcissist, right? And we always the first thing that comes to mind when you say this word is negativity, right? That's the very first emotion you think of, is negative. Is there anything positive about a narcissist?
I don't think it's very easy to answer that, because it's really recognizing the fact that narcissism is a spectrum. And I believe we're also at this place where to call someone a narcissist has almost become trendy. And that could be frustrating for somebody doing this kind of work, because it's really recognizing where someone falls on the spectrum. So they might have elements of narcissism. I think it's fair to say most human beings do. It's a matter of, are they leading you, right? So can you use narcissism in a healthy manner where you are able to be bold, you are able to be forward, you are able to recognize who you are? Sure, but it really comes down to the ability to be self reflective. A true narcissist, one that is really not doing so well in society, is not able to be self-reflective. Even psychiatrists and psychologists will say it is incredibly difficult to diagnose a narcissist, because they are the ones that are least likely to come for help. It is the people that have survived those relationships that are going for help.
Hmm. So let me ask you this: what signs should a person, like if I ask the younger generation, and I always tell people, maybe Taylor Swift has popularized the term covert narcissism, in one of her recent songs, anti-hero, she mentions this. What are there different types of narcissist?
Absolutely. That's why I call it a spectrum. And the spectrum basically runs from covert narcissist all the way to overt narcissist, which really can be as bad as being like a sociopath. So a covert
Right.
narcissist is harder to see, because they're quieter in their behaviors, they're manipulative, and it takes time for that to unveil. An overt narcissist is kind of the textbook narcissist, and the ones we're used to seeing, and we tend to understand more from just a defining aspect of what it is to be narcissistic. But I feel the covert ones can be rather damaging in ways that are so incredibly subtle that you don't see it until a lot of time has gone on.
Kind of like a baby snake versus a full-blown rattlesnake,
Absolutely.
right?
That's a very
Yeah.
good comparison.
Interesting. So what could somebody do? How would they recognize that they're in a relationship, like a narcissistic relationship, whether it's, you know, boyfriend and girlfriend, husband and wife, mother and father, mother and child, right? Parents. What can they do? What signals would they recognize in a
One way to
narcissist?
recognize a narcissist is to tell them something they did bothered you and watch how they respond. Because a narcissist tends to
Mm,
have very immature responses to such questions or statements that you in some way hurt them. They often will deflect and make it, well, I did it because you did this, and they make you the problem. They will gaslight you to say that they didn't exactly do that, or you didn't understand, or you didn't remember correctly. They get mad and irate and create a fight, right? Whereas if they're able to just ask you, like, oh, could you know, tell me more about this, you know, if they're able to apologize, you know, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. I didn't mean to, or, you know, let's talk about this so I understand this better. Because, you know, a true apology is the ability to not only apologize, but to make change. If a narcissist apologizes, and I almost chuckle when I say that because I call it the narcissistic apology, they'll say something to the effect of, I'm sorry you feel that way. And my response to that is, don't be sorry for my feelings. Be sorry you did that to hurt me, because they have this inability to be self reflective. It really just comes down to that.
So let me ask you this, Chris Wascom, and Chris is a medium, and she works with people all around the country. I guess you do these virtual coaching sessions or whatever. But Chris, I want to ask you, how does somebody recognize like coping skills, or how do they develop coping skills? Like maybe they're a teenager who thinks they have a narcissistic parent, or maybe they're a parent who's trying to deal with a narcissistic child. Maybe there's you know, how do you cope with these different, since narcissism, as you've taught us here, is a spectrum? How do you know where a person is on this spectrum, and what kind of coping mechanisms do you use to deal with that?
Usually, the behaviors will tell me where they lie on the spectrum, roughly. Someone who, like I said, is more overt, they're easier to see because they tend to be more volatile in their behaviors and their emotions. Whereas the covert ones, they tend to have the more quieter, subtler tactics. So, like I said, that can take a little more time. As far as being in these kinds of relationships and environments, we all develop these adaptation styles because in the beginning, it's never what it evolves to be, especially in romantic relationships. When it's a parent child situation, it's a little different because that's truly developing an adaptation style to survive in a home, right? You know, a child from the age of 0 to 7, their one focus and goal from a physiological standpoint is to survive. So they're not going to look at their parent and say, oh, you're wrong and you need to do better. They're going to look at themselves and say, I have to change. I have to do this to make my parent happy. So if you have narcissistic parents, you are going to adapt to that environment. So it's about looking at yourself and your trauma responses: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And when you recognizing these trauma responses in yourself, you are recognizing how you are responding to a toxic relationship.
Chris, let me, and I don't want to pour salt in a wound here, and you've been very open about this, in some of my research here, I was listening at you talk that you, quote unquote, cut your parents off, right?
Yes.
About 5 years ago or something. You have personal experience. You're not just another talking head using AI stuff to create courses and books, and you've got real personal firsthand experience with dealing with this, don't you?
Absolutely. My parents are on separate sides of the spectrum.
Really? And are you comfortable talking a little bit about
Yes.
this separation? Yeah. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what
Yeah, of
led up to
course.
this? How did it happen? What led you to the decision? Because I always say, Chris, that life life is better without some people in it.
I agree.
And I feel this way about my own mother, and my own mother has a lot of problems. And when she enters this circle, there's always some kind of catastrophe, always some kind of problem. And I always say that life is better without some people in it. What led you to that point?
It was certainly a process. It wasn't an overnight decision, although my parents would like to paint that picture that I just drastically made that decision. But it, you know, I would say I inched to it. When my oldest child was 2, my father hit him. And because I grew up being hit regularly, this obviously really bothered me. I was absolutely the most upset I probably could have been because the only reason I left my child alone with my father is because I was nursing another child and I had to leave the room for a moment to go get a burp cloth. And when I came back and I saw the look on my son's face, I knew exactly what happened because I used to have that look on my face. And I made the decision after a very difficult couple of weeks of my mother blaming me for creating drama and my father actually apologizing for, I think, the first time in my life for doing what he did and the fact that he seemed to show remorse. I chose to forgive him and I chose to continue having a relationship with them. And it was another 8 years that went by. And if anyone's in any kind of narcissistic relationship, they know it's a cycle. You are going in this cycle of it being good, and then it goes down to that lower level of where it just sucks and some event happens. And so we were doing this and we were playing that game. And God love my husband for allowing this, because when he got to the point of really just not being okay with it and just supporting me because I still wanted a relationship with my family, then it came to the point where my father threatened my husband. And that was I'm done. You're not doing this anymore. And to punish me, they decided they weren't going to wish my son a happy birthday. And so I'm like, okay, so this is a child you hit, and then 8 years later you choose to just punish him because you're mad at me. And so, like I said, it's like those baby steps, but I decided I'm done. So I blocked them on my phone. I blocked them from emails. And then I just went into panic mode. I had anxiety for the first time in my life, because when you have people that have punished you your entire life, you are in this trauma response of what is going to happen to me? What are they going to do? And so my first course of action was to go into therapy. And I found a therapist that specializes in narcissistic abuse. And what I think I really needed out of that experience and what I gained from it was validation of what I was experiencing, the things that were not okay, that I wasn't crazy, that my parents were in fact narcissistic. Because a lot of people, we've come to a place where I think a lot of children of narcissistic parents have been cutting them off. And a lot of those children are being judged for doing so. How could you cut off your parents for all they've done for you? But what people really seem to miss and don't understand, that it physiologically, psychologically, it completely goes against the grain for a child to cut off their parents. And it is probably the most difficult decision I made in my life. And my only regret is not doing it sooner, because it put me on this journey to healing. And I was able to not only calm, but regulate my nervous system, recognize where my trauma responses were, what my triggers were, and it allowed me to be a better person, a better wife, and absolutely a better mother. Because a lot of the tendencies that were in me, because I was raised by narcissism, I was now able to address and be a cycle breaker and not carry that on to my own children. So it really was just this healing journey that ultimately opened me up to spirit. I wasn't doing any of this work prior to cutting my parents off.
Interesting. Chris, and I can tell you from my own experience, when I finally just had to take a step back and cut my mother off and say, look, enough is enough. We're not going down this route anymore. That's a very difficult ball of emotions to deal with, because you're right. I mean, you struggle with this idea of, wow, they've done so much for me. They sacrificed so much for me. They've done this, they've done that. But when you just look at it and think, you know what? I have to live my own life. I'm an adult. There's a certain sense of betrayal. I felt almost like a betrayal, like I was doing something really horrible wrong. How would you counsel, or how would you help somebody? What would you tell them who's experiencing this emotion right now of like, okay, look, if I do this, I cut them off, I'm betraying them, I'm being disloyal, I'm somehow hurting them, even though I'm helping myself. That makes me look like a horrible person. What would you tell that person?
Well, first, I would let them know they've been conditioned to feel that way. And all of those feelings, fear, shame, guilt, those are the ones that come up. That's all in your lower chakra system. So most of my work is working with reading energy and reading energy of people that go through these situations. And the heaviness that is felt in those lower chakras are very significant of those experiences. So it's really working to unpack that and allowing the energy body to heal, because you are literally falling into these trauma responses because you have been conditioned to. So if you have a parent that instead of trying to do better and be better is just turning around to try and make you feel bad about a very difficult decision you just made, it shows that they are not willing to try and help heal the relationship. Now, I believe it absolutely takes two sides of the relationship to heal. And I really worked very hard to try for that, hoping that it would be better. And it didn't. And I was still ultimately punished for making the choice, but it certainly wasn't for lack of trying. Really, I should have cut them off when my father hit my child. That absolutely should have been it. And if it were me today, I would have no problem. But that shows how broken I was. Here's someone that hit my child, and I was like, okay, I forgive you. We can still see each other and have a relationship. And I look at that like, wow, you were really damaged back then. Because to this day, I absolutely still can't believe I did that. I'm still forgiving myself for that because as a mother, I was meant to protect my child.
So,
And I feel I
Chris,
let him down.
yeah. And Chris, let me ask you this. How does spirituality fit into all of this? I mean, we've been talking about like strong willed people, strong willed children, narcissism, narcissistic behavior. How does spirituality and mediumship, how does this fit into all of this?
Well, I believe we all have soul contracts. And in those soul contracts, we choose our parents and we choose the lessons we want to learn based on the relationships we ultimately will have with whomever we choose. So I do recognize why I chose the parents I chose. Although when I first recognized that, oh, we choose our parents, I remember, why would I do that to myself? I was horrified by the suggestion, but I see what it did for me on a soul level and how it helped me learn and how it helped me evolve and how it helped me come into this work because I help people heal from trauma. I mean, most of my work is working with people that are either in a relationship with a narcissistic partner or have had a narcissistic parent growing up, or they have had severe childhood trauma. And when you've had severe childhood trauma yourself and you can work to heal yourself, then you can help others. And I really value my work and what I do. And I'm very grateful for the fact that people feel very safe to tell me the very horrible things that they have encountered growing up.
I want to ask you because you've talked a little bit about this before in some of your other interviews that you've done about like when somebody says, well, I'm sending you good energy or I'm sending you, positive vibes or whatever. And maybe you didn't ask for it, you know, but, tell me about that. Like, there was one interview I was watching, you were talking about this, and somebody was like, they were going to send, like, you have to get permission to send this to somebody. Did I
When
misunderstand that? Or,
If I'm remembering what you're referring to, when it comes to me reading people's energy,
yeah, yeah.
I ask their permission. So if anyone
Uh-huh.
has come to me for an appointment for an energy reading, that's
Hmm.
already them giving the blessing, right? And open,
Hmm.
then their energy opens to me. But I will always recognize an energetic boundary and not push past that. And also, if someone comes to me and they're asking about someone in their lives, I am going to be reading the energy through that person. I'm not going to go around to the individual they want read because that's an energetic invasion on someone else's energy. And if I don't have their permission, I'm not going to do that. So, if someone's like, oh, I'm with this partner or I have this coworker, can you tell me more about them? Like I said, I'm going to go through the client of
Hmm.
that is working with me and I will feel their energy based on that. So that means it's the energy they've allowed to the world and they've opened to the world, not to me. But because it's open in the world, it kind of just makes it fair game. It's like filming the people in public type of thing, right?
Yep, yep. And
So,
Chris, let,
yeah.
let me ask you this. I'd like to go back to this because you had hit on something just a few minutes ago about we chose our parents. That's an interesting concept because a lot of people have this belief, that our parents were chosen for us, and that we were sent here to earth, and do all this different stuff. But you're saying your belief is that we chose our parents to
That is
learn.
my belief, yes.
How did you come to this belief that we chose our parents?
It wasn't an overnight thing because when it was first told to me, as I said, it blew my mind, and I had strong cognitive dissonance. I wasn't really willing to accept that. But the more I was able to unpack the lessons I've learned having the parents I do and what it has allowed me to do in life, I recognize why I would have chosen them. And we don't choose them by ourselves. We're kind of a committee with our spirit guides, and we're creating these soul contracts based on that. So, and it is also analyzing previous life's lessons and helping to figure out, okay, what do I want to learn in this lifetime, and who am I surrounding myself with, especially in these formative years, that will allow me to learn these foundational lessons to carry forward.
Hmm. Well, let me ask you this. So, with with all of this, okay, our children chose us. That gives us as parents, right? That almost puts a certain responsibility on us, right?
I think
What?
so.
Yeah. What? How do you counsel a parent to handle this responsibility? I mean, especially if they've got like one of these old soul children, right? Maybe they have one that's kind of an old soul and one that's not. What advice would you give to a parent to figure out whether or not they even have their kid has this old soul trait, or how would you raising them? How would you recommend? What advice would you give to them?
I believe listening to that type of child is very important because I believe they have lessons for us as much as we have lessons for them. So if you can put yourself in a position to be a guide and a support system as a parent is meant to be, but also recognize that your child can teach you too, then you really can have a very healthy relationship.
So, and real quick, so do you counsel people one on one? You meet with them
Yes.
on the internet, or do you meet them face to face, or how does it work?
Both. Most of my clients are online, but I do have, I'm in my office right now and people do come to my office as well.
So walk me through this real quick. If a person wants to schedule a session with you or a meeting with you, what could they expect?
So when someone comes to me, more often than not, they're coming to me for an energy reading slash healing session, is what I call them. And what that means is they're going to allow me permission energetically to read their chakra system. So I will connect my chakra system to theirs, and I will read, and we have many chakras. I'm reading the seven main ones that we tend to see in pictures. And I will pull out what their chakra is choosing to reveal. So I will find feelings, emotions, experiences, who they're connected to. And I will, as I do the read, I make notes of this. And then after the read, will converse with my client about it and what I pulled up. Sometimes this can pull up some pretty strong emotions. So, because it can feel very vulnerable. I've had people cry. I've had people say they feel like I'm climbing inside of them, or just saying, I can't believe you knew that. No one knew that. So it can be rather vulnerable. And like I said, I don't push past energetic boundaries. If there's something there that you're not going to want me to know, your body will block that, and that's okay.
Is
Like
this
I said,
similar to like hypnotism or something like this?
no, it's
No?
not. It could also almost be a form of meditation because I just ask that they sit there and that they're grounded, and then I help ground their energy further, and I just help open up their chakras. So if they have a blocked chakra, for example, I will let them know, but I will also let them know what I'm feeling around that because I'm kind of a seeing is believing kind of person. And in this kind of work, you tend to get a good amount of skeptics, which I'm completely fine with. And I welcome skeptics. So it's easy for someone to say, oh, your chakra's blocked. I can't read that one, right? But what if I say, okay, this one's blocked right now and doesn't want to let me in. And what I'm understanding is you've had trauma in this area, and this trauma is connected to, say, this person that I'm getting the energy from. And I'm understanding an experience that happened around this time and has kept you very protected in this area. And then they will be like, yes, I absolutely understand. And I said, so, we'll work on some of the other things that your body brings forward and is more comfortable with, but I just want to let you know that we're just going to leave this one be for now. And I'll just keep going. Or in other cases, I might get a little in, right? Where the chakra lets me in slightly, but then I'll find some sort of barrier. So it's like, okay, is the barrier for me? Or is the barrier for others? So I'll see this a lot in the heart chakra. So someone that's been very traumatized and very wounded, they tend to protect their heart a lot. So it'll be, I will see in my mind's eye what the barrier is. So say for example, I see like a heart and it's in a cage, but I could see in the cage. That means they've guarded their heart, but they're still open because I could see it. But if I can't see it and there's like a brick wall around it, then they very much have protected themselves and their energy. But also, they're going to have things in life that reveal that. They're probably single and lonely and feel very isolated. So, your energy, whatever it's showing me, is going to also tell me what is going on in your life at the time. And that's
What is a
essentially
chakra? What is a chakra?
chakras are they're energy wheels in our body that essentially tell us that, and they spin, right? But they can overspin, they can underspin, and that indicates kind of where you are at emotionally, physically, physiologically. So I believe energy healing and reading really helps you see what is going on in the body at a deeper level. And someone who's not necessarily reading energy, they might do stuff like muscle testing, because if you're familiar with that book, The Body Keeps the Score, the body does tell us what is going on if we're willing to listen and we're willing to explore it. And this doesn't mean that you shouldn't go and receive medical help if you are feeling the need to do so, but just also know there might be some root element there that can be uncovered and that could maybe assist you in that process.
So if somebody had a meeting with you and they did this energy reading and they discovered this stuff and they took it to, say, their local psychologist that they're seeing or their therapist or whatever, is there a chance that their therapist could say, "What the hell did you do? Like, what is this?" Or
I
or,
like
or
this
they pretty well
question.
open it.
So I would say for me, in my experiences, I get the reverse where people will say, I'm coming to you because I've tried therapy and it hasn't worked for me, or I've tried therapy and I feel like there's just not much more therapy is helping me with, and I want to explore other avenues. So while I have had clients that have a therapist as well as seeing me, and these are usually clients that are seeing me about, pretty regularly, I haven't yet had a negative aspect in that. But this is not to suggest that people out there are not going to think that this is just bananas. And that's okay. That's
Yeah,
then I'm not for them, and
for
I'm fine
sure.
with that. The people that are meant to find me and that feel aligned with me do, and I love that. I welcome that. And
Chris,
if
how does
people
somebody get a hold of you if they want to do them
online, I would
just
say my
online?
website is the easiest, which is my
ChrisWasko.com.
name, chriswasko.com.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Well, Chris, I will link that in the in the description of the podcast and the YouTube channel, YouTube page here.
Thank
Um,
you.
Chris, before I let you go, I want to ask you two questions that I always ask people that come on this podcast. Number one, what are your three non-negotiable habits that you can't live without?
Three non negotiables is to always be grateful. Just stay in that space of gratefulness and do it every day. To connect to myself and allow self care and always be honest.
Yeah. And last one, what if you could go back to a younger version of yourself, say somebody 20 years ago? What advice would you give them? What would you tell them? What would you tell her?
I would tell her she's stronger than she realizes and that it's going to be okay.
You know how often I hear that when I interview people, how often I've interviewed athletes, psychologists, I mean, really, and how often I hear that. Just keep going. It's going to be okay. You'll get through
Yeah.
it. It's so
Yeah.
true.
It is so true because you come to this place, especially if you've had a lot of darkness in your life, where it's hard to see any light at the end of the tunnel and it's hard to hold out for hope. So when you get to that place and that version of me probably just really needed a hug and to just know it's going to be okay and you're going to be really happy one day.
That's it. Chris Wasko, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate me and to educate the audience on this. I feel like sometimes when people hear these words like narcissism or, you know, psychic medium, and then you throw the word spirituality in there, they're like, whoa, 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 this is a taboo subject. And I think that probably comes back to the biggest hurdle in life, the lack of knowledge, lack of education, right? And I really appreciate you coming on here and teaching us and sharing your experiences and sharing your thoughts and sharing this whole process with us. I'm truly grateful for that. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
Thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to. I know some of this stuff can be a little too woo woo for people. So just to have the opportunity to share and, I think at one time it was a little too woo woo for me. My background's in business. So I'm more surprised than anyone that
Well,
I'm doing this work.
well, that's crazy. So,
Yeah.
well, Chris, thank you so much. And reach out to Chris if you're interested in this. Um, Reach out to her, chriswasco.com, right? And I'll link that to the description. Chris, again, thank you so much.
Thanks, Matt. Take care.
See you soon.